Welcome to the Let Me Be Free podcast. My name is Jackie.
And my name is Alwynn.
We're two sisters from Ireland living in Australia, navigating our healing journeys together, and this is our podcast, Let Me Be Free. We'll be interviewing everyone who's helped us to get us where we are today, whether that's therapists, loved ones, people from our Facebook group, Let Me Be Free, the Wounded Inner Child, or people who we've never met but have had huge impacts on our lives. Follow along with us on this journey as we try to dissect what has really worked for us in the hopes that you too might be freed. Before we jump into today's episode, just a friendly reminder, guys, to have a look in the timestamps in the description to make sure that all the topics that we discuss today are comfortable for you to listen to.
Hello, sister. Welcome to today's episode of the Let Me Be Free podcast. We had some feedback that in the episode with Lavinia, you didn't give an explanation of what inner child work is. Before we get stuck into craniosacral therapy, are you able to give a summary of what you're talking about when you say inner child work?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that would be a whole episode about that. But the way that I see inner child work is at the time of a traumatic event in childhood. And that doesn't have to be a necessarily traumatic event as in abuse or anything like that. A traumatic event can be being in a very chaotic household, or a teacher singling you out, or something that's traumatic for us as a child. The way that I see inner child work is in those moments, a lot of the time, when we don't have the opportunity or the chance to process safely the experience, we press pause. Essentially, we don't process that trauma, and that child, whatever age we were, essentially gets stuck. We become stuck at that age. So say, for example, the teacher says, I'm 7, I'm in a classroom, and the teacher says, you're stupid. Did no one teach you how to write? And so in that moment, I am internalizing, I am stupid, I'm singled out in front of the class. There's a belief system there that has been locked in, and it's as if I press pause in that moment and I don't process the emotions, I don't process that experience, and then I'm an adult, but I have that child within me who still believes that they are stupid. But now I'm an adult experiencing life, and my boss says, oh, you forgot to put in the document that I told you to put in. And that inner child, that little child within me, becomes triggered. She is now with her teacher in the classroom in front of all of these kids. She is stupid again. And so it re-triggers that pain and that wound to come up in our adult existence. And so when I talk about inner child work, it's essentially about getting aware and becoming aware of the wounds that we have created, or that were created in childhood, that are still active and frozen essentially in time within us, that are inhibiting our ability to exist in our adult life. And this impacts every single aspect of our existence. So much of the actions that we take in everyday life are a result of an adaptation. So Gabor Mate talks about adaptations, which I would highly recommend people to Google, because he really describes it incredibly well, how we adapt in childhood. But essentially, we are all adults. We are all meeting each other as these adults. But in reality, none of us are actually fully formed adults. We are essentially an adult with little children running the show. The wounded inner child who believes she's stupid, the little girl who was never good enough for her mom, or whatever that may be. These little children have literally paused in time, and they are still stuck within us, frozen in time. And until we can go back, create a relationship with that child, the little girl, the little boy that we were, and help them to process that emotion, help them to heal that trauma, we're never actually going to be free in our adult life. Yeah. And so there's a lot that I would have to say about inner child work, to be honest, because there's so many different levels, so many intricacies, so many questions around it that would need to be answered. But I guess in the short of it, the best way I describe it is that, we are an adult, but we've got all of these, I guess, little these children within us, the little girl or boy that we were in the past. They haven't processed the trauma, processed the pain. They just become locked inside of us in little bubbles, and they are essentially ruling the roost of our life, which again really impacts our relationships, impacts our ability to work and our ability to get and have what we want. I don't know if that really answers the question, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. And is there an inner child model that you go to learn how to work with these inner children and help them process the trauma, so that in the here and now, you're not getting triggered by something that happened when you were a child?
There was no model that I ever actually followed. I remember someone telling me briefly kind of some steps to take in order to communicate with my inner child. And supposedly what I heard at that point years later, when I met that same woman, she was like, "Oh, who did you do inner child work with?" And I was like, "I didn't do it with anyone. I did it by myself." And she was like, "You did it by yourself? Like, how did you know what to do? How did you navigate that?" And I was like, "I just thought that that's what you do. You figure out your inner child and you find how to connect with them or whatever." But in reality, she was like, very few people actually manage to do inner child work by themselves, because it's it's not that it's a complex process, but it's quite an elusive process. It's hard to make sense of it unless someone can kind of shine a bit of light on. For many people to say, for example, they just have lots of questions, or say, for example, a lot of inner child work includes, journaling or trying to get to those memories. A lot of people don't have memories. And so there's so many questions that need to be figured out, teased out in order to do inner child work. There is an inner child workbook that I did start, and I enjoyed that. But like anything, if it just doesn't feel right in the time, I only did a little bit of it. And I kind of figured out the rest by myself. I just essentially kept journaling memories and stuff like that from childhood. I didn't have any memories, but I guess anything that would come up, any snippet. And what I learned to be true for me and for everyone that does inner child work, it's essentially about showing up for the child within you. It's about creating that relationship with the child within you. I liken it to the way that I describe inner child work to everyone essentially is when you, so often what I find my clients get snagged on is they believe that the inner child is them, and so they have the right to have all the information from their inner child. Like, okay, I have an inner child. I'm just going to ask them, essentially, what the fuck is wrong with you? Tell me what's wrong with you so I can fix my life and move on. And so, what I say now to people that I think is the most important element is our inner child is, I call it fostering your inner child, because I believe that that's the same process that has to happen in the building the relationship with the child, the little girl, the little boy within you, in the same way that you foster a relationship with a foster child. So say, for example, if you are going to foster a child, you are going to have this child come into your house. They have been through possibly, obviously a traumatic childhood. They've been passed from house to house to house. They have had people who they have trusted who have let them down again and again and again. So when this child comes into your house, you're not going to say to them, okay, tell me everything that happened to you. I want you to follow my rules. I want you to help me. I want you to tell me everything and be open and honest with me. That's never going to work. This child has been traumatized. And so what you do is you create a safe environment for this foster child. You say, this is your room. This is your safe space. You allow them to have their experience and their emotions, and you essentially just keep on showing up as a container. If they fucking, end up doing something really stupid and losing their shit and throwing stuff, you recognize, wow, you must be really struggling. I'm here. Like, I'm still here. I'm not leaving you. I'm not abandoning you. I'm still here. Even though it's uncomfortable for you to watch them, you know, essentially self-destruct, you are still holding that container space. And this child then begins to think, wait, this person isn't leaving me. This person isn't abandoning me. They're still here. And so the more that you develop that relationship with this child, the more then that one day this child might say, you know, my first mother abused me, or my first mother didn't like me very much. And you listen. You never would say to that child then, oh, where did she abuse you? Or how was she neglectful? What did she do to you? Like, you're not going to essentially interrogate her for this poor child. You'll just listen. You'll openly listen, and you'll be that sounding board, and you'll create that space. And the more that foster child feels safer, the more that she'll share with you, the more that she'll trust you with her pain and her sadness, and the more that she then will be able to integrate into the family, and you can move forward together. But
so doing inner child work is a bit like doing parenting. Like, there's no one model, you know, like you don't become a parent and it's like, okay, you can just follow this one parenting model. Well, actually, there probably are parenting models out there. But it seems like with inner child work, it's just a name for something, just like parenting is the name for parenting. Inner child work isn't a specific model that you follow. Like, you can Google inner child work or put inner child work into YouTube, and there's lots of different people who have different ways of doing it. Just like if you put parenting tips into Google or into YouTube, you'll get lots of different tips or ways of doing it. And you can do work with a therapist or a coach or a psychologist who will do inner child work with you. But how they do it, it's not one specific way. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. And I think, you know, the main part of inner child work for me, and I guess the main focus for me in any work that I do, or even any teaching of inner child work that I do, my main focus is developing the relationship between the adult and the inner child within them. And so a lot of the time, you know, like, especially as adults, we want to see results. We want our lives to get fucking better. We want things to be easier. And, you know, so often us as adults will then try and steamroll, you know, the inner child, essentially. Like, why isn't she fucking communicating with me? Or if she's struggling, why doesn't she share it with me? And like you said, if you're a parent and you're like literally hovering over your child and you're saying, what is wrong with you? Like, what? Just tell me what's wrong with you. They're going to be terrified. They're not going to open up to you, you know? And so unfortunately, the process is very similar. And in the same way, parenting is struggle, and it's kind of long, and you really have to figure it out. Working with your own inner child is a process, and it's learning. It's something you have to figure out. And there's so many little intricacies that that become apparent, and that are really that show up in inner child work.
So I think we were talking about this earlier, and I was just saying how I think the reason that I didn't really go down the inner child work route in comparison to you is because I like to have more structure around what I'm doing. And so I think I really resonated and went towards internal family systems therapy because it's a specific model. You know, like when you Google internal family systems therapy, you're not going to have 20 people with different ideas of how it's done. Like, it is a process. It is a step-by-step process of how you do it. And I think, you know, when it comes to parenting, I would be the same type of parent. You know, like, I would want a model that says, this is the best way to work with your children. when they are having tantrums, and I would want to find a specific model, because I know that there'd be lots of different models. There's lots of different parts work models. There's inner child work, internal family systems, schema therapy. There's lots of different ones. Just like with parenting, there's lots of different ways that you can parent a child who's having a tantrum. But I would want to find one that specifically is like, this is a process that you can follow for managing their tantrum or managing their behavior, or, you know, managing the day-to-day parenting things. And then I would just want to stick to that. You know, like, that's the type of person I am. I want someone who's already done the work for me and to give it to me. And obviously I have to resonate with it. I have to feel like, yeah, this is definitely something that I think is going to work for me, and it's in line with how I like to do things. But then I like to be able to follow that. So I think that's one of the things that one of the best things about us doing the podcast is that we do have differences in the types of therapies that we like and the types of therapies that we resonate towards. You know, like, you find internal family systems therapy too complex, you know, and I agree, like, it can get very complex. I wish there was a beginner's version of it, yeah, you know, but I think it was just worth at the start here outlining what inner child work is, because so I had a friend who said to me that yeah, we hadn't actually stopped and said, what is it? And I think part of that is because it's kind of hard to define, because it's not one way that you do it. So
But
yeah,
there
I think
there is lots of starting points though. Like, I think many people kind of agree with the starting points of how to begin inner child work. And I think we're all very much on the same level there with regards, you know, there's different tools you can use to connect with your inner child.
yeah.
You know, so there is a bit of a structure there. But I think that when it comes to communicating with your inner child on an ongoing basis, you know, it can be a bit more of a complex process, because, you know, with internal family systems, I feel like, you know, there's different routes. There's a bit more where we can logically dissect it, which we can make more sense of it, which helps us. We can logically be like, okay, well, I'm eating, or I'm getting angry. This is the angry part. You know, there's a bit more of a, okay, I can control the fact that this is a part of me and it's an angry part. It's obvious. But when you're dealing with inner child work, it really, I feel like it feels so much more of a vulnerable, a continuous vulnerable state of work, because you're not picking it apart into different logical steps or logical frames. It's very much about developing a relationship, and it's very slow. And like, as I said, with fostering a child, it's very takes a lot of time. You don't see the same progress that you see in IFS. But I feel in the long term, the depths of connection that you feel to yourself can be quite profound, because you're,
and I think
know,
ideally it's the combination of the two, because I
yes,
feel like with internal family systems therapy, you're working with, so the way I see it is, an inner child in internal family systems is a wounded child. That's what they refer to it as. It's a wounded child part, or a wounded part, because sometimes we get wounding as adults. It doesn't have to be just as a child. So it's a wounded part. That's what essentially we're referring to when we say an inner child. But then there's the protectors, and inner child work doesn't really work with the protectors per se. But I feel like there's so much focus in internal family systems therapy of working with the protectors and unburdening the child. There's not really a lot of focus, and there's not really a lot of process and procedure around how to just be with that child. Like you said, like you're fostering a child, you need to just be with it. Like, internal family systems is very goal oriented, It's like, we have a goal, we want to be better, let's figure out how to get better. This is the process to get better. Now the behavior has changed. And it's very goal oriented in that way, which obviously is why I like it. I like to set a goal and I like to achieve it. But the reality is that some of these wounded parts, it's not a goal that we need to achieve. It's not something that we can just do a specific technique and now they're going to be fine. Like, they're like foster children, like you explained. They need us to just be present. They need us to just be, to hold that space for them to feel what they need to feel. They need to trust us. They don't need to be turned into a goal that needs to be, achieved. So I think there's a coming together of both.
I think that's a very good point now that you said it, actually, because I loved when we started doing IFS. I absolutely loved it. Like, I really loved to have that, okay, there's something I can do. I felt like I had kind of more control over my own healing rather than just feeling and being with this child all the time, But it was interesting because I remember when I started it, I was like, I just got to that point where I was like, oh my God, I just felt like I was doing so many things at once that I lost that connection with the wounded child. Like, I had gotten so used to holding that little child within me on an ongoing basis that I kind of got distracted. And I wasn't holding her, but the other side of it with inner child work, the way that I see inner child work and IFS is when, the way we talk about protectors and you have the protectors and stuff like that. What I find is the more that you develop a deep relationship with the child within you, the protector actually doesn't, or organically doesn't need to be as strong, doesn't need to be as present and as active. So it's an actual organic side effect from being with the inner child.
With inner child work, the goals are kind of achieved as a byproduct of the work that you do, whereas with internal family systems therapy, you're setting that is the goal, and you achieve it, or you don't, basically, but there's a process to achieve that goal. So it's going about it in two different ways, but inner child work is definitely more I don't know if easy is the right word, because it's certainly not an easy process, but it's certainly less complicated. Like, there's not a big structure or process or procedure around it. And so I guess it's just up to the person. If you're kind of the type of person who likes structure and likes procedure and likes to just follow a step-by-step process, then you'll probably be more inclined towards internal family systems therapy. And if you're someone who likes to just more organically work with these parts, you're probably going to lean more towards the simpler inner child work.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because so Roisin, obviously last week we had Roisin, or 2 weeks ago, whatever. And it was so fascinating working with Roisin. And one of the things Roisin had said ongoing was there was so many things. Like, she was like, there's attachment theory, and there's IFS, and there's schema, and there's the heart chakra, and there's energy work. There's so many different I guess things that you can do in order to heal. And it was really fascinating because with her, and to be honest, with all of my clients, actually, I just focused directly on creating a relationship with them, between them and their inner child, healing that relationship, healing the wound. That's my specialty. It's what I focus on, right? And it's so fascinating because I see what Roisin, it's actually really helped. This is just an example. There's obviously loads of others, but Roisin was very much wanting answers in everything. She would read books all the time. She was always seeking to find the answer to fix the problem. And when she worked with me, it really was, we worked so much on bringing it all down, simplifying it so much that it was all about her relationship with the wounded parts of her, tapping into the feelings, the wounded parts. And I remember, she had messaged me one day and she said, I was looking at, I did all this, read this book about attachment theory. She's like, wow, like, you know, it's incredible. It's so interesting about attachment theory. And I recognize what attachment I am. And she said, in attachment theory, they say you have to kind of go to, say, a psychologist who does attachment theory. And she was like, and I know that you focus so much on inner child work, and you say that everything is an organic, essentially, ripple effect from healing this wounded child within. And so she was like, you know, do you believe that, you know, in working with the wounded inner child, that the attachment itself will shift and change organically in many ways, you know? And I was like, you know, it's a really interesting, I didn't really think about the different modalities, but I said, I definitely think that, you know, if you were to branch off and try and work on, you can have an awareness of all these things, and having the awareness is incredibly powerful. But I believe that if you are consistently working on, like, say, for example, attachment is a wound. It's a wound where you didn't attach to that caregiver because the child didn't feel safe, or doesn't feel loved, or doesn't feel something, essentially, it doesn't feel worthy. But if you keep on fostering and working on that relationship with your inner child, helping that inner child to feel worthy, feel loved, feel seen, feel heard by you, then essentially you will be able to heal attachments, because you'll be able to listen and communicate to that child and hear what it is she needs that she didn't get when she was a child, when she was meant to be forming those attachments. Mm-hmm. So I feel like a lot of things really do ripple from this one simple thing. And I guess it's why I focus on it, because there's so many things that we can be working on. There's so many things that we can have an awareness of, that it is really powerful. But sometimes when we have our hands in too many baskets, it dilutes the process. Mm-hmm. And so for me, you know, having people have that strong awareness of their own patterns, their own childhood, the feelings and experiences of, like you, the parts or the inner child. I believe that once you can hear the messages and the communication from the inner child within you, what it is that you need, what it is you want, and reestablish those wires, essentially, that we talked about in somatic therapy, you know, then you can just communicate with them about what it is that they need or want, or what it is you're not giving to yourself, and heal that and fix that. Like, they are the ones with all the answers. You don't need someone else to, you know, you don't need to work on essentially the attachment, because the inner child or the part of you will let you know about why they feel that way and how to heal it once you develop that powerful, strong connection, that trust.
Well, I see those things that you just mentioned there as two different things. Like, attachment theory, by the way, is absolutely amazing, and I think it's worth everybody learning about it. It's one of the first things that really, like, I have 5 books out of, God, hundreds at this stage that I've read, and one on attachment. One of them is on attachment theory. For me, attachment theory is understanding what's wrong. You know, it's like, I have a broken leg, for example. Okay, so I know now that I have a broken leg. That's like attachment theory. Okay, I know now that I have a anxious attachment, or I have a so there's anxious, what are the other two? Anxious, disorganized, and avoidant. So those are the 3. And then, of course, there's secure attachment, which means that you've had a secure childhood and you have a secure attachment. So understanding what attachment style I have is like understanding, this is the problem. I have a disorganized attachment style. I have a broken leg, for example. But then there's many ways that I can fix that broken leg. You know, like, the surgeon can go in and put bolts around it to bolt it back together. They can decide just to put a cast on it. They can, you know, make it so that I'm not putting any weight on it for a certain amount of time. You know, they can decide, oh, well, it might fix itself. Like, there's options, right, as to how you heal that broken leg. And it's the same with attachment theory and other things that help you understand what is the problem. So then once you understand what is the problem, then the next thing is, how do I heal that? How do I fix that? How do I heal my broken leg? There's lots of options. I choose one. It's the same with attachment theory. How do I heal my attachment disorder?
Yeah.
So it's like those two things are different. One of them is about education and understanding what the problem is, which
Yes.
ultimately, unless we know what, and it's the same with labels, you know, like whether you get a label of PTSD or ADHD or bipolar or whatever, like a label is just helping you understand this is what's wrong, so
Yeah.
that then you can go, okay, what treatments or healing modalities or what ways are there available that can fix this or help me live with this or whatever it is. So for me, those are two different things.
Oh, definitely two different things. But I also believe that, we can have, I think I'm the same. Like, I still YouTube stuff, Google stuff. Like, I'll have this awareness, like, say, for example, attachment, and I will read in a book on attachment theory. And I'm like, wow, I have this type of attachment theory. It really does make sense. And nearly that knowledge and wisdom kind of like sits into my system. But necessarily having the awareness and the understanding doesn't change, like you said, doesn't change the attachment. And so it's like you
Yeah.
said, what is it I'm going to do to heal that? But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, so there's so many, the way I see it, and it might not be correct, but there's so many ways that we can heal different things. Like, so say, for example, I could go to an attachment worker, someone who helps me with attachments, like, or a psychologist or someone who specializes in attachments, and they will help me, say, heal that attachment, whatever. The same way with, like, again, I know Roisin did this course, the heart healing course, it was a few weeks of like hypnosis and stuff like that. And I can, work on healing that my heart, all of these things individually are all very powerful. But from my experience and from my own work, what I have found is when you focus on the inner child, I feel that it actually ripples into all of those. Like by working with and healing the inner child, or working with the parts within you, like in IFS, that is the root. That is the root that's in the earth. That's, that's where the root of everything is. I feel like attachment theory is a branch. And like all of these things are branches that you can heal individually. But if you go straight to the root, develop that relationship
to the core,
the core, or create that relationship with your parts and have that awareness, then everything else can be healed more simply from that space. So it's not that I'm saying that attachment theory and everything isn't profound and incredible, and knowledge is power. Like, recently I've been Googling belonging because I really felt like I don't fit in, I don't belong anywhere. And, Teal Swan, I just listened to her video and it just gave me so much, a sense of just not being alone. I felt understood, I felt seen, I felt heard, because Teal Swan had been able to explain something that I was feeling inside of me. It didn't necessarily change what I was feeling, but the knowledge, awareness of why I was feeling that way really did help. And so I'm not saying that all the knowledge outside of it isn't what needed, and that self-discovery isn't powerful. But I believe that if you focus on the root, be it parts work or inner child work, I believe everything can be healed more profoundly and more, I guess, more deeply from that place.
Yeah. And while I'm talking about it, before we move on, I'll just mention that attachment disorder, well, it's not, the book is called, it's an audiobook, and I think it's called Healing Your Attachment Wounds by Dianne Poole Heller. And I don't think you can get it in written book format. It's just an audiobook. So I would highly recommend that book. And then there's also a YouTube channel where she talks about her whole channel is about attachment healing, and she goes through and talks about the different attachment wounds. And the really good thing about both those people, whether it's Diane's book or whether it's this girl who I'll link to in the show notes, because I can't think of her name right now, both of them don't just talk about what anxious attachment style is. They then go, this is some ways that it can show up in your life, so you can kind of like see if you resonate with that. And then they go, this is how you can help yourself with this type of anxious attachment style. In this situation, this is how you can help yourself to heal it. And then if you are someone who's supporting someone who has an anxious attachment style, this is how you can help them heal it. Or if you're in a relationship with someone who has an anxious attachment style and they're doing all of these different things, this is something you can do to help support them. Or this is something that will help if you're one attachment style and they're another attachment style. These are some ways that you both can work together to heal. And so that's anything that I recommend. I'm always looking at, I don't just want to know what my label is, whether it's talking about anxious attachment or whether it's talking about like a mental health label. I want to be given solutions. I want to be given tips on, okay, this is my attachment style, but what do I do about that? How do I heal that? What can I change? How can I change that? So I will link to those two in the show notes. Now we have gone very far off topic, Ollie.
One more thing. There's two more things actually. One is I would absolutely love to have someone on attachment styles. I'd love to interview someone on attachment styles. I'd love to get a bit more knee deep into it. And
you are so good at just like randomly emailing people and asking them if they'll do interviews. Like I can't think of anything more like nerve-wracking than doing that, but you seem to have no problem whatsoever. So you can email the lady who does the YouTube channel and see if she'll come on and talk to us.
Yeah, definitely. I'll watch some of her videos, and I definitely will for sure.
You've watched some of her videos before.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do remember
you like her.
I wasn't too sure if she was the same one. I think I know who you're on about then. Okay, so that's one. And the other thing that I just wanted to say that I think is definitely also worth chatting about, which I know I've had so many comments on the group about it. Labels.
Yeah.
Labels. People want to know about labels. And it's a complicated, like some people, and I totally get both sides. Some people are like, having a label helped me to come to terms with it. And then other people are like, you know, a label doesn't, it's a byproduct of something else. Like, you know, you get yourself stuck into a box. And so I'd love, again, another time, whatever way we do that, to discuss labels. And I guess because we've never talked about labels, and I don't even know what your stance is on labels, to be honest. But yeah, it is a really interesting topic, I think, because I would have been one of the people who didn't want any labels, but yet and
I'm the one who loves the label.
Yeah. And then when I discovered about BPD,
which is borderline personality disorder.
Yeah. That really, that when I discovered about BPD, oh fuck, that transformed my life, because at that time I was really aggressive. I was not in control of my body, and I was like, I just didn't understand what the fuck was happening to me. I was like, there's a monster inside of me and I can't control it. And I didn't realize it was another part of me taking over. I didn't understand. I thought that there was something severely wrong with me. And so people say, you know, like that, they don't believe in the labels. But at the same time, I remember when I discovered about BPD, and I'm not diagnosed with it, but I know that at that point when I was being aggressive with the kids, like I just felt so much shame that I couldn't control. I had no control over my hands. I had no control over my body. It was like I was in the back of consciousness and I was like screaming at myself to stop. But I was like, you know, that realizing about BPD, and that, you know, that was a part of me that was taking over, because another part of me felt so vulnerable and so unsafe. It actually felt like I could finally do something about it. I felt like I could finally take steps to help that part of me and be like, wow, okay, this is a part of me who's a protector that's taking over, but it's not a monster. I was so afraid of looking at it. I was so afraid because I felt like it was all of me, you know. I thought there was something so wrong with me, but really it was just a byproduct, obviously, of childhood trauma. But yeah, it's one of those things that I really feel like we'd have to really chat about and nut out, because there's many many things within that.
We definitely need to do an episode on that, because, you know, just like everything, labels when used appropriately can be really helpful, and there's also ways in which they can be used that aren't helpful. And, you know, for the majority of labels, personally, I just think it's a combination of parts of us combined with nervous system response, combined with, you know, attachment traumas, you know. So but we have to be able to label stuff so that we understand which aisle we're going to, so we understand what list we need to make, what things we need to do, like,
you know,
that's my personal opinion.
I'll say this last thing. You know, I remember one day, right, having this like awareness of, I think I might be bipolar. And so I looked up everything about bipolar, and I was like, fuck, that really resonates with me. Like, because I'd be very high and then I'd be very low and whatever. And I was like, I think I'm bipolar. And then I remember messaging, I've been working with Satyen a little bit at that point. And I messaged him and I was like, Satyen, I think I might be bipolar. You know, is there some supplements, whatever you think I should take? And he was like, I believe that a lot of those things, and bipolar included, is, you know, in many ways a nervous system response. And I was just devastated. I was like, I thought I had fixed my whole life because I figured out that I might be bipolar. And he was like, you know, if you work on your nervous system, you know, I prefer not to get into labels, but if you want some healthy supplements, which is what I asked for, he had like given me a recommendation, whatever. But he really burst my bubble, because I was just searching for something to fix me. I was like, if I have a label, if I'm bipolar, then it makes sense. Then it's, at least I know what's wrong with me.
And I think that's what I mean when I say labels can be used to help us, and sometimes they're not helpful. And, you know I've been in the same basket where I've gone, oh, I know, like, I have my label now, I'm fixed. And it's just not the case, you know. Like, there are certain things that labels are great for, but having a label doesn't fix you, you know. You still, it's just like knowing, okay, my leg is broken, you know. That's what a label is. And I know what the problem is. Knowing that you have a broken leg doesn't make your broken leg fixed. You still have to do, whether it's surgeries, whether it's physical therapy, whether it's occupational therapy, like, you still have to do all the things.
Do you know what also I figured out as well, along my path, is I recognize that people want a label because they don't feel validated in their pain. Like, I think that's a brilliant use of labels. I think that is one of the best use of labels, is so that they can feel validated in their pain, seen in their pain, find community who are similar, you know. Like, there's so much validity in that. That can't be underestimated, the value of that. Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, where I say with Satyen, like, as I said, I think I'm bipolar, and he was like, oh, you know, it's generally a nervous system response. It was kind of like, you know, no, but I wanted to be able to say that I had something serious so that people would take my pain serious. Like, because pain feels, it's so, like, when you have, and I've talked to people about this before, and I know it's hard, but when you are diagnosed with cancer or something, I feel like you get the sympathy. People are like, wow, that's really difficult. You're struggling with something serious. But when I was in the depths of my trauma, it was like, I felt like I had cancer in every single cell in my body, you know, but it was like no one could see it. And I just was suffering, but I didn't have a label. If I could say, you know, I don't know, like, I have this serious problem, people might actually give a shit, or they might have more sympathy for me, or it was just suffering. I
Yeah,
was
but even
suffering.
at that, Ollie, you know that even if you had gotten the label of, BPD or bipolar or whatever, like you're never going to get the same response that you would get if you had cancer. Like it's a
Oh, no, I
different
know.
thing. People
Yeah.
look at mental health and cancer in different ways,
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. Like, I know that when people say, with labels, it's like there's nearly this stigma, it's self-inflicted in some way, or it's a way of searching for like this kind of you know, what's that word where people just want to be seen, like it's like
Yeah,
a way of getting attention kind of thing, and
yeah,
that is the reality of mental health, which is why people with mental health struggle so severely. And I feel while so many of us get trapped in the victim mentality because no one takes us seriously, no
yeah.
one takes the pain seriously. And if we're healed, like that's what I found when I was, starting to feel more healed. It was as if all of my pain, it never existed. Like, oh, Alwyn's doing
Mm-hmm.
really well, so, maybe it didn't happen. Maybe she didn't
Yeah,
suffer the way she suffered. It was like, whereas if I had a scan that said I had cancer, it's like, oh no, she always had it. Like she was always suffering. Wow, isn't she a warrior for getting through it?
yeah,
Rather
yeah.
than being like, oh, well, she seems fine now. So really, do you think it could
Mm-hmm.
be that bad? Do you think anyone,
Mm-hmm.
it is that validity, and it's really sad. But I think sometimes, again, as we said, we can chat about labels, but they can become a real prison. They can become
Yeah.
a real prison of limiting yourself to being stuck in that
Mm-hmm.
prison of that specific label as well. So, I
I
think,
think for me personally, like understanding I had PTSD helps me a lot with shame because, I would get so triggered by something and lose my shit with someone. And then, like, once I kind of came out of the cloud of that, like, once I kind of came back down to earth, I would feel so much shame. I'd be like, oh my God, like like I would be so hard on myself. And then once I understood, I had PTSD. That was a PTSD response. It doesn't change that I don't like that it happens, and it doesn't change the fact that I have to you know, work on my own mental health so that it happens less or whatever. But it just means that, like, one, I can talk to the people around me and they can be aware, like, I do have PTSD, and sometimes I get so triggered that it looks completely abnormal to someone looking on. Like, why would I be so triggered by this? Just understand that, like, if I do get triggered, I know the steps that I need to take, and in that moment I might not be able to stop myself from freaking out, but afterwards I can do things. Like, it helps me because instead of it being it's I'm wrong, it's like there's something wrong that I deal with.
yeah,
Like, that's what the label helped me with. It helps me understand that, you know PTSD isn't me, it's something I have, it's something I deal with, and it helps me live a better life, and it helps me explain to the people around me, like, when I do have these moments where I completely freak out, like, it's it's not that it's okay that I do that, but it isn't me,
yeah,
and I will repair afterwards. If I do something wrong to you, if I say something wrong, if I freak out, and you're hurt by my freak out, I promise you that I will come back and I will repair that. Which I couldn't do that before because I felt so much shame about the fact that I would just, like, have these freakouts, and then I would just, like, hide, or I'd change jobs, or I'd, like, just avoid those people, or, like, like, it just changed how I coped.
yeah, definitely. And I think another point there to note is sometimes people still don't get it. Like, I know the way that you catastrophize and stuff like that, those symptoms of your PTSD, you can explain that this is something that happens to me, but some people just are never going to get it. And we have to
Mhm.
recognize, and I think that's, I guess, again, about really us working on our own mental health, working
Yes.
on our own I guess our own worthiness, and releasing that shame, is that unfortunately we can explain to people, but it's like trying to explain fucking unicorns
Mhm.
or Santa Claus when no
Mhm.
one's seen it before, or they don't believe it even exists. And so
Mhm.
some people are unfortunately just never going to get it. And I know a lot of people in my group really struggle with that, where they have partners or they will have friends or they have people in their life that just, they keep on
I
trying
find it's often the
understand.
worst with like family members and family-in-law members, like
Mm,
family members who are your partner's family members. Sometimes I find like that can be the hardest. It's like when they don't understand.
yeah. And I think, like, you know, so often I find so many people, they just keep on getting stuck in trying to validate how they're feeling so that they can get that validation from those
Mhm.
family members or from their partner or from people around them, because they want their pain validated. They're like, I'm
Yes.
serious struggling with this. This is a symptom. I'm not bad. This is a symptom of my PTSD. But all people see is, no, you still keep doing the same thing and you don't seem to
Yeah.
be taking any responsibility for it. And it's
Yeah.
a cycle. It's a really toxic cycle. Whereas, you know, that's where I guess, you know, I know for you, as much as it would be very uncomfortable for someone to, because you energetically feel, you can feel if someone doesn't really believe it or get it,
Mhm.
or, and you would still feel the shame because you'd be like, oh, they just think that I'm making excuses. But that's where you, because you've done your work, you'll be able to be like, well, if they feel that way, then that's just the way they feel. Like
Yeah.
I know my truth. And I
Yeah.
think that's the difference, where we're focusing on people outside of us and trying to get that validation, that our pain is real and that it exists, with other people around us, and that our symptoms, the things, the actions we take, you know, so often, you know, I know partners, with kids also, where the partners, can be very judgmental and very shaming in the reactions that the mother or the father has from
Mhm.
their trauma response. And they're like trying to explain that it was like, I can't help it. But some partners don't get that. They're like, no, how can you not help it? How can you not stop that? But again, it comes back to that inner work and being like, no, I know my truth. If I could have done something differently, I would have done something differently. And I guess that's
Mhm.
where the really inner work happens. And I guess where also I had a lot of strength, come up, where I just recognize, you know, when I would do something really shit or something really fucking shameful, I would say, okay, Alwyn, if you went back, could you do something differently? And every single time I would say no, because I wasn't in
Mhm.
control. I had no
Yeah.
control over my experience or my responses in that time. But yeah, like, so it's, you know, I can repair, and I can, yeah, like, I can take responsibility for
Mhm.
how I hurt someone else. But there's a difference between taking responsibility for how I hurt another person and how, what my actions caused another person to experience, and shaming myself over something that I had no control over. And I think that's where
Yeah.
that inner work really comes into play, that we need to be able to stand tall and strong in our own truth and forgive ourselves, in these moments, and recognize that,
Mhm.
yeah, it was a part and a symptom of
Yes.
my PTSD or my trauma or whatever that may be.
And the reality is that you're never going to do the work to help yourself if you're feeling completely submerged in shame. You know, like those things can happen, and you can either do something to try get better or you cannot. And at the end of the day, if you're feeling so much shame, you're just not going to do something because that's going to be so debilitating.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so yeah, we've talked about quite a few things today. Attachment theory, we've done a very quick talk about attachment theory, a quick talk about inner child work, and a quick talk about labels. Um, you know, like we said, we could easily do like a whole episode on each of these topics, but we still have quite a few episodes to air with our therapists, and other episodes that we've already been working on. So I think it was definitely worthwhile to just do this episode where we do a brief chat about each of those things. And I'll put the links to anything that we talked about in the show notes. So, you know, people can go and educate themselves on the topics. And then maybe in, you know, a few months' time, when we've kind of gotten through some of the other episodes that we're in the process of doing, we can maybe do some on specifically on these topics. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, I really loved being able to touch on those topics. Obviously there is so much more that needs to go into these things, but yeah, I feel like they're all very important and very, like, I guess, when we think about what needs to be heard in this moment, I think, those things, I always find everything happens exactly as it's meant to happen. I believe that
Yeah.
everything is spoken about exactly as it's meant to speak about. And it's really interesting because, I just randomly talked about attachment theory, I wasn't planning on it. But
Hmm.
it's when you talked about that book, and again, this is something that I talk about a lot, I just felt this ping of like, ooh, I want to listen to that. Like this, like just this drive. And I think that,
You've never listened to that book?
no,
Really?
I'm pretty sure I
Okay.
haven't. Yeah, because I never
Okay.
really been that interested in it. I looked at a few videos on YouTube, but
Yeah.
I don't think I listened to the book. No. Um,
Oh.
yeah, like I think, as you go on this journey, everything comes up exactly as it's meant to come up. And I think just following those breadcrumbs is what I say. Like,
Yes.
if you
Yeah.
listen to this podcast episode and you're like, oh wow, inner child, that sounds really interesting. Like I feel this drive, I feel this little push, I feel this little spark inside of me. Follow the spark. Same with attachment theory, if that's what resonated. Same with the labels. It's like, wow, God, there's something in there for me. Like there's something that
Hmm.
resonates for me. And I think, the more that we can, I guess, touch on these topics, I think the more that we can help people to I guess they can branch off from there and do
Yes.
their own internal work
Yes.
and research it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Have a lovely rest of your day, sister, and I will chat to you later.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in today, guys. All the links to the information we discussed in this episode will be in the show notes, including timestamps where we change topics, so if you want to come back later and just listen to one section, you can. If you haven't done so already, please join our Facebook group, Let Me Be Free, The Wounded Inner Child, and post either anonymously or not what's going on for you in your world. We'd also be delighted if you would share this podcast or the Facebook group with one person who you think would benefit from the information. Be along, Mahaguf. Have a beautiful day.